Nice to see you, sir.
Greta, very good to be on your show.
Glad to have you here in the United States.
It's always great to be here.
We have a pretty good relationship with the United States and the UK, don't we?
Very, very important. The single most important factor of the last 200 years in world geopolitics, I would say.
Indeed. In fact, tried to burn our White House down, but we're over that.
That was a long time. That was 1812. That was 1812. That's over 200 years ago.
We're over that.
We're over that, yes.
Okay, all right. What do you make of this deal that President Trump has brokered, essentially brokered between Hamas and Israel?
I think you've got to face it, and this will drive everybody nuts, but this would not have happened if it hadn't been for Donald Trump. There's no question about it. You know, he put the hard word on both sides. He put the hard word on Netanyahu to do a deal when he's got these guys on his right who are going to leave his cabinet because they want to annex Gaza. You know, these ultra-nationalist guys. Netanyahu's own political future must look a bit more uncertain now. Because he's done the deal. He's bringing the war to an end. Hamas, it looks to me like they're going to have to give up their weapons. Their single biggest point of leverage is the hostages. The only point of leverage is the hostages. Thank heavens, thank God, they're finally giving them back. It's a wonderful thing. But I don't think it would have happened if Hamas hadn't known that Trump was serious in saying, if you don't do this, we're going to get medieval. I mean, we're going to wipe you out. And I think that focused their mind. So this was an instance of the President of the United States using the power of his office and the force of his personality to deliver something for the world that I think is just massively positive.
Why was he able to do this? I mean, we had a lot of countries, big countries, important countries, where the leaders haven't been able to do it. What's different about him? I
think there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, he built up a lot of credit and trust in Israel because he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He'd been with Israel in this extraordinary operation against Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities. That was a massive thing, and I think nobody could doubt his support for Israel. So that was very, very important. And I think that with the other guys, with Hamas, the great thing about President Trump is, he has an air of unpredictability, but you think you can't take the risk, and I think that those guys genuinely thought that it was a credible threat he was making to them, that if they kept going, unless they took this deal, then they would be wiped out. And so, to a certain extent, in human affairs, sheer force of personality really does make a difference. And so what I really hope is that President Trump will see what he's achieved here by exercising maximum American pressure and do it now on Putin, because there's a huge opportunity. Putin's really not in good shape, and there's a much bigger war going on, tragically, than the war in Gaza, and hundreds of thousands of people have been killed and are still being killed in large numbers by Putin. And he has a chance to fix this, and he really, really can. I hope he's emboldened by this and encouraged.
Is it possible to work with Putin? I know you were critical, at least, of President Trump giving Putin quite that reception in Anchorage, because that didn't quite turn out like everybody did. But so, is Putin somebody who you can get to?
No, no. And I think fair play to President Trump. He had to try. Right?
Yeah, no, I agree. You got to try.
He had to try. When you have something like that, and he's got a previous relationship with Putin, he had to see whether that was worth anything, and it's been proved to be worth.
Have you ever met Putin?
Yes, yes.
What do you think of him? What is he like?
Yeah, he's small. I would say he's a bit sort of goblin-like, faintly like Gollum in the Lord of the Rings, if you've ever seen that. Yeah. Sort of pixie-like. He speaks surprisingly good English, actually. Surprisingly good English, and he's smart, but he's having terrible trouble. If you look, the Ukrainians have taken out huge quantities of his oil refinery capabilities. You've got big queues in Russia now for petrol. The price of oil is really hurting him. He's actually having to import oil from other countries because his refineries are all being blown up by the Ukrainians. His economy is in a very, very bad way. And I think that President Trump has a goal. And if you, I bet he'll claim that he's disappointed about the Nobel Prize, right? And he'll say, "Oh, this should have been given to me." Though I saw that Machado, who got it,
she tipped her hat. She
gave a generous tribute to him, and quite rightly. But if he wants, that thing is nailed on for Donald Trump. If he now puts the same pressure on Putin that he's just put on Hamas, and he can fix this thing.
What's the leverage with Putin? Because he doesn't seem to want to give up.
I think that the leverage is very simple. It's about the economy, and it's also about his military position.
So what's his playbook at this point?
So what I would say for the president, I think what he's got to do, there's $250 billion of Putin's frozen assets in a Belgian bank account. I think that the United States, Britain, everybody should be saying, it's crazy. What's that doing there? That should be going to the Ukrainians as a down payment on the reparations that Putin should be making to Ukraine. And number two, there are all sorts of weapons that the Ukrainians already have, but they can't use to take out bases in Russia. I know that actually President Trump, contrary to kind of a lot of the negative stuff you hear about him, he's actually being much more positive and forward-leaning on giving the Ukrainians the intelligence that they need to take out those bases. But the Tomahawks would help, right? The Tomahawks would help. And so would the German Taurus cruise missiles, about 1,000 of them that haven't yet gone to Ukraine. So give them the permission, give them more weapons. The shadow fleet. Putin is surviving because he has this huge number of sanctions-busting oil tankers that are going around concealing what they're doing.
Why can't we stop those?
Send them to Davy Jones. We can.
Then why haven't we? Because that shadow fleet has been very potent for him.
We should take them to Davy Jones' locker, frankly, and that's send them there. And the other thing that I think we should do is, and the whole world should do, is put more sanctions, more So what the president has done with secondary sanctions, with tariffs on people buying Russian oil, Chinese, Indians. Now
you don't, because you and I had that discussion before about that.
And I know you're completely right, Greta.
The Brits don't. You don't.
And we should, and so should all Europeans.
No, I mean the Brits don't use their oil. They don't get. You got your own oil.
Oh yeah. No, we don't use Russian oil.
That's right.
We don't. We stopped that. We sanctioned the guys. We totally sanctioned. But what we should be doing, what you're doing, and we're not yet doing, is financially penalising countries that do buy Russian oil. Do you see what I mean? And that would make a huge difference. That would really hurt.
That would
Putin.
be like India.
Or lots of countries. That would really hurt Putin.
Why haven't we done? Why hasn't that been done? Why hasn't the United States done that?
You're doing it to some extent, but not enough. And we should all do it together. And that would make a huge, huge difference. And so what I'm saying is, keep backing the Ukrainians. Give them the money that they're entitled to. I think morally that Putin has got, and that's frozen in Brussels at the moment. The Putin's money, and I think that you're looking at a situation where Donald Trump could really be the architect of peace, not just in the Middle East, but in Ukraine as well. And when that happens, he's going to be the Bjorn Borg of Nobel Peace Prize winners. He will.
But I think many people in the world have forgotten who started this. That's what bothers me. First it was Crimea in 2014, and everybody looked the other way, and then it was over the Ukraine border beginning in 22.
Yeah, but Greta, there's a reason for that.
Why?
Because, one of the reasons is because we say because. Frankly, we're not clear enough about it in NATO, and sometimes the president hasn't really been very clear about how the war started, and seemed to imply that Ukraine bore some responsibility. It's complete nonsense. This was Putin's war of choice, right? He decided, for no reason, no good reason at all, to attack a completely innocent sovereign European country.
I look at it like Hamas. Hamas decided on October 7th. They started it.
You're spot on. It's completely the same. It's completely the same. And so I think the president gets this. I really do, and I think well, let's see what happens. But
Yeah.
he's shown the ability to exert pressure, and I'm optimistic.
When I saw you when I was in London a couple of weeks ago, a lot of people I talked to on the street were talking immigration. There were protests about it, and a lot of them said that they wished that the UK would have immigration policies like President Trump.
Well, I agree. I mean, and so shortly before I left office in 2022, we'd finally come up with a policy. Because the problem that drives people nuts is when you see people coming across the channel in boats, right? Just as you used to have people coming across from Mexico, across the Rio Grande, whatever it is. You've got illegals, and that infuriates people because there were lots of coming, and there still are coming every day. But we had a deal with Rwanda in Africa, where this is just before I left office, sadly. And it was going to be absolutely brilliant because what happened was the minute you arrived in Kent, you found that Kent was twinned with Kigali, and first, but you didn't even get to go to sleep in a hostel. You went straight back. You were going to go straight to Rwanda, and that as soon as the news of that scheme broke in Calais, where they have the gangs that send people across, they started to panic and send people elsewhere. That would have worked. And I think I'm right in saying that other countries are now adopting that scheme, and I think the US is trying to do a deal with Rwanda now as well.
Well, I was just mostly surprised at how many people, and I talked to one 95-year-old woman who was so upset, and her husband, they talked about how they needed a passport to go to France, and yet people could just flood across the channel and come in, and they said take their pensions and take some of the services.
Yeah, and I think that I understand how they feel. I think that actually having some immigrants come over, talented people. My own great-grandfather was an immigrant. Lots of my family were immigrants. It goes for a lot of American families, I guess, ultimately.
That's ultimately we are.
A country built on immigration. So immigration per se is not a bad thing. But what is no good is when you have uncontrolled immigration and when you have illegal immigration. Now, what we did when I was Prime Minister of the UK is we took back legal control of our borders. So the people you met complained about needing a passport to get to France. Well, the flip side of that is that actually, if you can't just come in from the EU unchecked, uncontrolled into Britain anymore, because you've got.
Well, they were saying it was coming in on the boats.
You've got hundreds of millions of people living in the EU who, before we left the EU, had the right to come and live and work in Britain as though it were their own country, right? Mm-hmm. So 450 million people in the EU, to say nothing of all the people living in the EU from outside, had the perfect right under EU law to come to Britain freely to live and work, right? Right. Now, and we got rid of that when I was Prime Minister. That was taking back control of, that was Brexit. That was Brexit. And we took back control of our borders. And it wasn't long after we'd done that. And sadly, I left office, as I say. But we also had the Rwanda policy. So we had a twin track thing. We could deal with the uncontrolled legal migration because we'd taken back legal control of our borders. And so we could have zero immigration if we wanted, because there are no foreigners of any kind. Yeah? No, go away. Or, and we could also, because we'd left the EU, we were able to do the Rwanda policy, which wouldn't have been permitted under EU rules. So I kind of see where people are coming. I understand where people are coming. I understand people's frustrations about immigration. I think people also are a bit. They have a bit of doublethink sometimes about this, because I think people also see that people who come to our countries do incredible jobs and work very hard, and they're vital for all sorts of services, and sometimes you simply couldn't do that. So you've got to be careful how you pitch all this stuff.
People think news just happens. It doesn't. It happens because there's someone there to capture the moment, to explain it and share it. That's my job. I go where news breaks and give you the facts. Join me for The Record on Newsmax.